Hello, folks. Welcome to GDC 2021. This is a live fireside chat. Geena Davis and Mitu Khandaker on masculinity in video games and the gaming community. I'm Joel Couture, editor-in-chief of Indie Games Plus. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be the moderator for this session. Now I'd like to pass things over to Geena so she can introduce herself, in case you somehow need an introduction for her and her tremendous amount of work in all kinds of media industries. So Geena, please take it away.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for that. And thanks for everybody for being here. I'm very excited to be a part of this today, and very excited to get going and talk about this topic that we've done a very extensive study about. And looking forward to all of this.
All right, and next we have Mitu. Could you say a few words about your own impressive body of work? Because you're pretty impressive as well.
Thanks, Joel. Just really honored to be here. So hi, I'm Dr. Mitu Khandaker. I'm a game designer and engineer. So I'm a professor at NYU Game Center, and I'm also CEO at Glow Up Games, which is a diverse mobile game studio. And I've been in the games industry for around 14 years now. So I've been coming to GDC for about that long as well. So really thrilled to be here to welcome Geena to her first GDC. So I've been lucky as well to be on the advisory committee for GDC for the last 6 years or so on the advocacy side. So I'm here to represent the game developers' perspective.
Well, it's great to have you both here. I'm just going to jump right in with some questions. So let's talk about this study. Can you tell us a bit about the study and how everything worked, Geena?
Yes, absolutely. We looked at both the games themselves and also the players that people watch play, and took a survey also to find out people's impressions and ideas about it. So this is a very, very extensive study, and we believe more extensive than any that's been done previously on gaming and what messages it sends.
Okay. What sort of specifics were you looking for in the study?
Well,
what were you hoping to find from watching what people play?
Well, we wanted to find out what, like I said, what message the games are sending, and found particularly strong results in what the male characters represent, and the impact of violence and hypermasculinity in these games that are being played, and trying to see what kind of impact that has and how it can maybe be improved moving forward.
Okay. The study indicates that many elements of the gaming ecosystem reinforce something called the man box. Can you tell us a little bit about what this man box entails? Because that was a learning experience for me, because I'd never heard this subject before.
Right.
Entails, how video games connect to it on many different levels, and how is this building a very specific vision of the world, and what is acceptable behavior through interacting with the medium of games? So it's a mouthful.
Right. So the man box is the 7 pillars of the man box is a concept that was developed by our partners at Promundo, and it refers to a set of beliefs that are communicated by parents and family and the media and peers and other members of society that place pressures on men and boys to be a certain way. And these pressures include telling men to be self-sufficient, to act tough, to be physically attractive, to stick to very rigid gender roles, to be heterosexual, to have sexual prowess, and to use aggression to resolve conflicts. And we found in our study that masculine norms are very strongly upheld, with 4 and 5 male characters displaying at least one of these pillars of masculinity. For example, 7 to 10 male characters are shown engaging in stereotypically masculine activities like taking risks, engaging in violence, getting angry. Nearly 1 in 4 male characters actually express anger, and violence is also a major component of this man box. 63% of male characters enact violence in the games, and 84% of that time, the violence is directed against other people. And the leading motive for violence from male characters is personal gain, compared to the small proportion of characters who are perpetrating violence for a more noble motivation, protecting a stranger or protecting society.
This kind of alters like your players, the game players' visions on kind of what reality is or what is acceptable behavior through their kind of interactions with these games.
Right. Yes. Hyper exposure to these kinds of tropes is very impactful, and will definitely, what we're exposed to over and over becomes a sort of reality for us, and media and games and the things that we see in our popular culture have a tremendous impact on shaping who we are. So, as you can imagine, playing these games over and over, or watching people play these games, can have a significant impact about what you think is the actual way that men should be, what masculinity should look like.
Yeah, exactly. Seeing these kind of reinforced from like hearing with the boys' hangouts, or seeing them reinforced in the games they're playing, can kind of feed into this is right, this is real, this is how people talk and act to each other.
Right.
To your point. Mitu, I'm going to bug you. Can you suggest some ways, no matter how small, to kind of break away from these man box elements in game development, or how developers can kind of steer away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, to speak to that, like this was the first time I was lucky enough to sort of get a peek at the study ahead of time. And I think firstly, to speak to the man box, like I think the thing I love about that definition is the way that it talks about how it is limiting, right, for both cis men and folks of all genders, right? So like the ways in which these representations kind of box people in certain ways. And I think the other thing as well, before I sort of get to your question directly, is that I love about the study is that it is very intersectional, and that's something I care a lot about. So there's a lot of, in addition to sort of looking at gender representation, it's also sort of, there's some groundbreaking sort of new findings through the content analysis to do with race representation, to do with queer representation, and like looking across all of these different intersecting axes, which is a really important perspective to take. And those are sort of all things that we should be thinking of kind of together as game developers, like, taking this very intersectional approach. I think, to speak to sort of ways that we can intervene in these kinds of representations, I think it's like several fold, right? As these things often are, because you look at this sort of, I think I have like, three distinct sort of ways that I think about this. Because firstly, there's the business perspective, right? And if we're looking at, because I know the study looked at sort of the top 5 streamers and what games they're playing. And so the reasons for, and often those are sort of AAA games, etc. And the reasons why those games are often sort of perpetrating these types of tropes, etc., is because the games industry, as we know, we sort of it's very like most designs are very sort of iterative, right? Like we take sort of what's worked before and innovate on it slightly, because games are kind of making games is inherently risky in a lot of ways. It's financially risky. It's also really, really hard, right? Like, as we know, as game developers, games can run into all kinds of, it's just a inherently tricky sort of technical and design sort of undertaking anytime you're making a game. And so often the things that, so innovation can often be difficult, in that context, especially. So I think the thing I'm getting to is that it really takes studios to hold values around wanting to break free of these tropes, right? It really does need to come from the business perspective, studio leadership wanting to really take a stance and innovate on these types of representations. And part of that as well is, something I'll get to again more, is like who is in positions of decision making, around what goes into a game, right? Like who is being represented? Because as we know, often it is, the games industry is overwhelmingly represented in leadership positions by cis white men and cis white straight men. So we need to disrupt that. And the last thing I'll say, I think from a design perspective, it's not that we don't have ways to think about better representation, because there are plenty of developers out there who are doing that work, and often those are folks from marginalized backgrounds themselves who have perhaps smaller studios, or they're doing work by themselves or in like tiny teams, but they need the opportunity to sort of have funding to really have their ideas pushed forward. So we need to sort of, this is a wide-ranging problem, and it's a structural problem that we need to disrupt.
Definitely agreed that this goes all the way through every level of like game development. Like, requires management to take a lead on this. It requires like people in like your position, in like leadership positions, to take care of things, handle things much better than they've been handled before. And it tells different stories, and it shows different types of like gameplay elements and risks. And yeah, it's risky, but like it also will broaden what this industry can do and say. Like reaching out to folks who aren't normally represented here. Geena, I want to bug you about some more stuff. What trends are you seeing in kind of the characters represented in video games? You touched on it a little bit, but sort of in who gets represented and how they're being represented.
Right. So male characters outnumbered female characters 4-1, and white characters outnumbered characters of color 3-1. Unfortunately, LGBTQ, disabled, and large body type characters are nearly non-existent. White male characters are twice as likely to carry a weapon as male characters of color, and are much more likely to be violent, particularly carrying a gun. And then when we look at the top 20 streamers, they are all men. Only one is a man of color, and only one identifies as LGBTQ. And there's often 10% of streamers use homophobic or transphobic language, or that language appears in about 10% of segments. No disabled characters. And then streamers often use ableist language in nearly half of the gameplay segments, like some kind of variation of the ableist language, crazy, in 1 in 5 game segments. So there's just a lot of that sort of negative stereotyping and violence and hypermasculinity going on in the characters that are being played.
You've also touched on what's the study revealed about the sexualization of women as well, because that was another thing that comes up quite frequently.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. There's definitely, of the few female characters there are, they are tremendously sexualized, hypersexualized, and this also has a tremendous impact on both the concept of women feeling comfortable to join in and play these same games, and how women are viewed from a sort of hypermasculine lens that sees them more as sex objects rather than equal partners. Mm-hmm. Female characters are 10 times more likely to be shown in revealing clothing than male characters.
It's definitely a large problem. What effect are we feeling this is having on the audience receiving the game? I imagine it's similar to what violence that effect has on like the males who are receiving these games. That's kind of open to both of you.
I mean, I can field that one. In terms of, just the experience, we know across like all kinds of media, and this is obviously, this is why it's so exciting to have Geena here to like talk about this, because obviously the work that you've done across like other sort of types of media representation also shows this, like representation matters. We know that. I've felt that in my own life, being a little brown girl growing up playing video games from as long as I can remember. You sort of learn, and especially, this is why as I was saying, like intersectionality is important. We need to look at gender representation together with race representation, because often, for someone in my position, like for instance, I don't know, like Street Fighter as an example, just because I remember playing it when I was young, and seeing the that classic dilemma that I think a lot of us faced of like, oh, do we are we the female character? Are we Chun-Li? Or in my case, like, am I Dalsim? Like the one, like, the Indian character, which is like not great representation, right? And so it's like, oh, who is like close enough to how I feel like I'm represented. And I think the thing that I often say about this is I actually, even though I was making those decisions, it didn't actually hit me for the longest time that was a decision I was making. Like I didn't, when I was like young and even in my teens, often like playing video games, I wasn't like, oh, if only I could see myself, because that wasn't even represented as, I wasn't even presented to me as an option, right? And so when you're sort of taught over and over that you're not going to be represented, you sort of internalize like, oh, maybe I don't deserve to be represented. And that is sort of this really, it's something that a lot of us carry, and it's in the work that I'm now doing through my company Glow Up, where we're explicitly setting out to rectify that. Like myself and my co-founder Latoya Peterson, as women and women of color, we think about this a lot. Like we've had these experiences, and so that's why we want to do better.
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to kind of see yourselves in these play experiences, and it's important for the cis males to also see other people out in the world. Like it's gives you this this closed worldview to see no one but the same white males doing the same white male fantasy, power fantasies all the time. So they're limited in kind of what they even accept of the world or see of the world. They don't see that these people even exist out there. So I kind of want to ask from the development side, Mitu, how does this affect developers who are like creating these kind of like sexualized versions of women, or like these like nasty stereotypes and things like that? Because I feel that must have an effect on like a development team who spends months and years like crafting like something frankly gross.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing I want to speak to is the experience of marginalized folks at these companies, right? So whether you're women or non-binary, or from any other marginalized axis, underrepresented axis within games, often folks do want to be, especially if you're a big team where you don't have that decision-making power. Like, this is none of this is stuff that developers don't already know, right? But what will often happen is folks in leadership positions will just like cut. So even if I've got just countless stories of friends, etc., who've worked on games where you start including more diverse representation, but then as soon as games often do, as I said, making games is hard, so they come into you run up against time and budget and all these things, and often because of the values of folks in leadership positions, the first thing to get cut is those diverse representations. And I think that is the thing that has the effect on folks, because they're being told like, oh, your experiences don't matter. We can also take that further, right? Like today is, as we were talking about a little bit before this, Joel, like today is a really interesting day to be having this discussion, because as Bloomberg reported, the lawsuit by the state of California against Activision Blizzard for the sort of alleged, as they call it, the frat boy culture within that space, like. The experience of being a marginalized person within games is often a traumatic one. And that's something that we also need to rectify.
Definitely. And if you're thinking of reading this in the audience, like looking at the articles in the lawsuit, please take care of yourself. It is probably one of the most awful ones I've read in a good long time in this industry. So please take care before you read it. All right. Just shift over a little bit. The findings in the study indicated popular stream games often promote hypermasculinity through violence or personal gain and aggression, like you said earlier. Do we have any suggestions for developers on how to better frame their game experiences to move away from this, better shape their characters to move away from this behavior, even if violence is kind of the focus of the game?
Right. Well, It would be important, I think, for developers to consider examining, do the male characters have to be aggressive all the time and repress their emotions and to fight anytime they feel threatened, which then results in more violence and more risky behavior. Perhaps they can think about what are ways that the characters can face these challenges in the game more creatively. What other more creative and mentally challenging ways can they address these problems, or more clever things that the characters can do rather than just shooting guns, and therefore, acknowledge that they have a role to play in reinforcing positive ideas of manhood, and I think that's very important.
To jump in on that as well, I think. Sorry, I guess that's what you're going to ask. No, I mean, I think that there is such a rich landscape of types of game design that have yet to be explored and to be funded as well, because these are types of things that like lots of designers I know have sort of experimented with, etc. Like looking at ideas of vulnerability, right, among male characters, like looking at there was a wonderful talk by the developer Bree Code a couple of years ago at GDC about sort of tend and befriend mechanics in games. So like that's an area where there are folks doing work, but we need those ideas to be sort of like given the platform and those ideas to be pushed further. So I think that and to speak to what Geena was saying about what other actions can there be, as a game design teacher. So when I teach game design at NYU, one of the lenses we have for thinking about game design is thinking about verbs that characters have, right? Like or that you can do as a player. So what are the verbs that like actions, like doing words that characters or the player is able to enact within a game that aren't necessarily just combat related. So there's there's all kinds of things that we can be sort of exploring further through games for sure. The idea of like friendship mechanics, the idea of just exploring more vulnerability, and I think part of that is also thinking about like pro-social design, right? So a lot of game design is often competitive, or a lot of games, in terms of the sort of subset of games we're talking about, there's like competitive gameplay versus like thinking about like, oh, how do you design for sort of more pro-social interactions between players? Like how does the game design actually help bring that about and reward those kinds of behaviors? So I think that's kind of what I found really interesting about the study, is that it points to the sort of necessity of creating these spaces for players of all genders, really, but especially for those who are sort of affected by this, like, or limited by this man box idea.
Yeah, there's definitely some proof out there that shows like different experiences in games, like not the hardcore, pure violent shooter is like, they're not the most popular things. They're still immensely popular, don't get me wrong. But these other experiences that push us to be more social, or that can bring a little bit of fun together, less focus on like harming other human beings, and like more different styles of stories are starting to gain a lot of like power, or power may not be the best word, but they're getting their audience. They're getting their audience. People are seeing them, and they're starting to be made. Like there is some different stuff finally coming out there.
Yeah, there was some wonderful stuff. We were talking a little bit earlier, Joel, about the IGF Awards last night, right? So we can see within that space the sort of plethora of interesting, like, new types of games that that are popular and that have that are being made, of course.
Yeah, and the talk about community kind of like brings me to my next question for you, gang. Research has indicated that many males find game to be a connection with peers and community. Like, so even we're seeing it there. Like they're finding there's a connection with those Twitch streamers or with their friends. So, and they're also saying, according to your study, Geena, that it's a place that can be their true selves. Gaming also seems to connect these players to make damaging stereotypes and visions of masculinity. So, what sort of work do we feel game developers can do in trying to use this feeling of connection and community to build something more positive, like build on that natural, like that desire to be together, but like if this, like, and to build a better true self?
Right, right. Well, we found a tremendous evidence for how important the connection with peers and friends and community is to people who game. Our survey showed that in the gaming culture, 91% of boys and 86% of men say that playing video games is an important way for them to connect with their male friends. But unfortunately, young gamers experienced a tremendous amount of bullying and harassment in online gaming. And older respondents said they routinely witness homophobia and racism in online gaming. So the culture is providing valuable human connection and certainly a space to do that. But the ongoing concern is that the culture often normalizes violence and hate. And so the thing to think about is, since there's such a positive aspect that you can gain from developing community and sharing time, special time with your friends through gaming, how can we make it a more positive experience and subject you to less bullying, harassment, and violence? There has to be positive things that ways to make the experience more positive and creative. And we know that what happens in the fictional world does have a real life impact. And the online gaming provides incredibly important opportunities for boys and young men to connect. But we need to make it so, as you said, they can feel like they're being their true selves online and not having to reinforce toxic prejudices and toxic masculinity.
Yeah. Your study brought up that they mentioned true self came up a lot. I wonder how much true self is, this is me without rules, not is this who I really am? Or is this who I am when the boys all want to be bad and I want to be bad together? Like, does it just feed that kind of nature, and do the males just kind of assume that's their true self because this is what I am without rules? And when it thinks of me, like
I know what you're saying. This is just me. This is just me speculating, but you do have to wonder: can they be their true selves when there's so much emphasis on being hypermasculine and embracing violence? Is some of it posturing, especially with young boys? Are they really feeling that, or do they have to emphasize hypermasculinity in order to feel like they belong?
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. And I mean, like you said, with the bullying being an issue and all the homophobia and slurs getting thrown around, like, are you being your true self, or have you been kind of cowed into this position? So it's feeding a lot of like negative stereotypes, to your point.
So I think just to jump in on that as well, it seems like, one of the things that the study it seems to point to is like, just these spaces being opportunities for male identifying folks and cis men, especially, like being able to connect, right? And and I want, and to some extent, is because like the parameters that the rest of society has set is like, oh, these are the ways in which you, like, number one, can connect, in this like very limited kind of way. So that's kind of one part of it. Like, oh, if there are sort of other types of like more pro-social environments, which and this is beyond a games problem, right? Because this is, again, like, this is like a societal problem writ large, as we know, as many things are. So I think that's sort of one part of it. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about, like, the study, to speak to that kind of power fantasy element of games, is, and I think you touched on this earlier, Geena, when you said that in terms of sort of representations of like aggression, etc., it's white male protagonists who are enacting those without sort of like other reasons. And I think one of the things that I found interesting about the study is looking at, like, oh, when there are characters of color who are also being being violent in some way or being aggressive in some way, often it's for this like larger social good, which is sort of like a trope in itself, right? But it's just interesting. Like, I just thought that was an interesting finding from the study.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely an interesting little piece that came out of it. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I did find it very interesting that white characters were so much more violent than characters of color. It's not like we say, "Hey, let's make it equal. Let's get the characters of color more violent. Let's get the white characters less violent."
All right. So I know we're heading towards the talking about management, but I wanted to ask, and maybe this is unfair to ask me too, but what do you feel that individuals working at game development companies, like all the way down the ladder, can push and do to help work for better representation and deter toxicity, sexism, and all those things? And I mean, we've seen, again, those gross allegations go all the way up the ladder. We've talked about how that change really needs to come from up top. But I mean, what can your white guy in the office do? Like, what do we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Oof, again, what a day to be.
Yeah, I think this is. Question. I think we need to talk about it today.
Absolutely, and I think that firstly, just reiterating that ultimately these problems go up to leadership, right? Like that is ultimately like. It's these things start from the top. So companies and leaders need to have values where they care about these issues. And often, and the way that I look at it, and often, yeah, it can be complex as well, because it's not to say that folks from marginalized backgrounds can't also, if they've bought into these hegemonic ideas, they can't also perpetrate this. But I think, it really does come from a question of values from the top, because that's also like who gets listened to at the company, who gets supported at the company, what is the overall culture at the company. And so that's definitely one part of it. In terms of sort of just folks who are not in leadership positions necessarily. I mean, firstly, we as an industry need to support marginalized folks being able to get to leadership positions, because it's not just a pipeline problem. This is what I say. And, I'm lucky enough to be like an if then STEM ambassador. Like I do all kinds of work to sort of help get more folks into the industry. But the biggest problem is that once they're there, they're not being supported and able to stay. And that's because they're not, it's at the least worst end of the spectrum. It's because they're not being listened to. And as we've seen in the worst end of the spectrum, it's stuff like what's coming out in the allegations, which is like just sort of the tip of the iceberg in a lot of ways in terms of like what really is going on. So one of the last thing I'll say about that is that it is incumbent upon allies, often like cis white men allies, to step up and like intervene when they see these things happen. And there's all kinds of things that can be said about that, but it's also not the burden shouldn't be on marginalized folks to drive the change. And often it is us who is doing it. So that's kind of, that's another thing where, again, like who gets listened to, where is the locus of power in the industry? So that's something we need to disrupt.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of marginalized folks literally just thrown to the wolves for a claim of diversity when nothing is actually changing in management. And
exactly.
Maybe I'm just speculating on this point, but perhaps some of that community feeling could be of value, because like Geena, to your point, like the males feel there's that sense of community in working with that, but there's the people in power who cause these errors feel they're all right in it. I mean, this is just my speculation. So meeting those walls of like their peers saying, hey, no, this isn't all right, what you're doing, uses that sense of community in games to show them, no, this behavior is not acceptable. Because when we're silent, I think everything's fine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Mitu, you smashed through my next question.
Oh, sorry.
So, no, it was perfect. It's like, shoot,
Perfect.
You're doubling up with my questions. All right. I got another one on, let's say, like the platform holders for like Twitch and that, and not just Twitch just came first. It's not the one I'm specifically calling out, but like streaming platform holders. Do we feel they have some responsibility in who gets pushed to the front as their popular streamers, and what we can kind of work with there? Geena, do you have any thoughts on that?
So say it again.
Sorry, I phrased that really funny.
Oh, no,
do we wonder if streamers, like stream platform holders, like where you were getting your footage for your study, if they have some responsibility they could possibly work, or tools they could possibly work with to kind of promote more positive representation?
Well, right. They would have to be creative about it. In other words, they would have to sort of maybe talk about the limitations they feel the game has, or maybe, be helpful if they talked about ways that they could creatively think of changing, getting away from as much violence and getting more creativity and cooperation in the games, and less stereotyping and hypermasculinity. They're certainly incredible influencers, so it seems like they should be part of the conversation if they would like to help impact the industry.
So to jump in on that as well. I think if your question is do platform holders have responsibility to shift the picture of representation in the industry? My answer is absolutely yes. Doing more, and some platforms are starting to do this, and certainly the conversations around race that started last summer definitely pushed more of these platform holders to sort of have those conversations and push marginalized folks in terms of who gets featured, etc. Shout out we exist. There's plenty of streamers out there from diverse backgrounds, and I want to shout out to communities like Black Girl Gamers, Brown Girl Gamer Code, the Noir Network. There are communities where you can find all kinds of other voices to profile and to sort of give a platform to. And yes, if we want wider systemic change, that is a really key part of it.
It's vital for those platform holders to take a hand in it. Geena, do you feel there's any aspect of the study I haven't touched on that you kind of wanted to push forward or talk about?
No, you've covered a lot of it. Yeah, you've done an excellent job so far. Yeah, I can't think of it.
Make sure I hadn't missed any important kind of elements of it.
Right.
Right. So, is the study going to become available publicly anytime soon?
Yes, it is. It's available on our website, which is seejane.org, SEEJANE.org. Yes.
And it just got released today, right?
Yes.
Which is exciting. So,
yes.
Like I said, I got to have a sneak peek at it. So yeah, excited for other folks to see it as well.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Has anyone been requesting the study, or I guess what's your next step from here?
Do events like this, promote it and bring it to attention, hopefully be in some articles about it, and move forward. We really value our relationship, our partnership with Promundo, so we can intend to keep working with them on this type of thing and see if we can make some progress.
Sounds great. So we're really looking at kind of management as being a central issue here. So, and we're pushing, we would like to see more marginalized people in positions of management. This is a difficult question to ask, but how do we think that can happen? Is there ways we can see the industry, like the bigger giants in the industry, help make that change?
So I think from my perspective, there's multiple facets to it, right? As I was saying before, it's creating environments where marginalized folks are not leaking out of the industry, right? There is a huge leaky bucket problem, as we call it. There's the old adage that within games, if you've had a career longer than 5 years, you're deemed a veteran because the dropout rate from the industry is so high. It's high for anybody because there's such a burnout culture in many ways, but then that's especially true for marginalized folks. So that aspect, absolutely, allowing folks to survive in the industry long enough and thrive. Let's just not survive. Let's create conditions for people from marginalized backgrounds to thrive in the industry. Such that they can reach these positions of leadership and management. So that's definitely one of them. And I think secondly, in terms of, because, one of the things that I'm lucky enough to see through the work I do as an educator, and just being able to so shout out to organizations like Game Devs of Color, where there are lots of sort of up and coming marginalized devs who have amazing games and amazing ideas, etc., but they need access to resources and funding. And that is something that needs to also come from the top, because one of the things that we see in terms of indie studios that get formed, often the ones that get funded are the ones who've come out of the big Activision Blizzards and the riots and all of these other places. So allowing access to funds for folks from more kinds of backgrounds is going to be super important.
Are there any good sources of funding that exist now that you're aware of?
Sources of funding?
Yeah.
Well, it's this is something I could definitely speak to, but I do want to shout out to things like Wings Fund, which is something that I'm on the advisory board for as well, which is a fund specifically funding folks from marginalized backgrounds and marginalized genders. There's also shout out to Galaxy Fund, which is run by some of the folks who started Glitch. Which is another sort of newer sort of source of funding, who are very interested in sort of pushing forward the landscape for underrepresented developers as well. So yeah, I mean, there's just not enough, and that's the thing, and we need to disrupt who from more traditional sources of funding, because again, those organizations that I shouted out to, it's marginalized folks setting those up often, right? So but we need people who are in existing sort of seats of power within the industry to also make those changes and hold those values.
Yeah, it's definitely, like we keep saying, it comes from up top. Right. Not that I'm barely hearing things. All right. You two are too quick. You literally burned through pre-prepared questions. So we are in uncharted territory here. Geena, I noticed in your study that there has been a little bit of growth over the years. You noticed between your study and I think there was another one done, what was it, 10 years ago? Or it was quite a bit older.
Oh, that we did?
Yeah, or at least some of the numbers have gone up very slightly, but there has been some positive change.
Some positive change. Okay, sure, yeah. I don't have the old numbers in front of me, but yeah, the change is too glacial. Obviously at this point, this has been. I mean, we could have said all this about games 10 and 20 years ago. The same problems showing themselves. So. It needs I guess it needs some enthusiasm to rethink this and see how can we really make it a more positive influence on society, and make it even more fun and more interesting and challenging, and a place to feel not only welcome but more supported and safe and inclusive.
Yeah. So we're seeing any sort of little, to Geena's point, glacial changes in positivity treatments of marginalized folks and.
Well, there's I mean, yes, things are definitely moving forward. There are more, again, there's more marginalized folks coming into the industry than ever before. But again, reiterating, we need to create the systems of support to be able to keep them there. There's the work that we're obviously doing at Glow Up Games, which is, just we're proud to be a really diverse studio ourselves, like I said. And we've fought hard to get there as well. We're I think the first studio of our kind, the first all women of color founded mobile game studio to have raised over $1 million in seed funding. So there's change is happening slowly. Just there's a lot of fighting to do to get there, and that's something that so many of us are working to change.
Yeah, I didn't want to imply that there was a we're good now because things are doing great now. We're getting slightly better, but no, like it's to Gina's point again. The change is glacial that we're seeing, and
Yeah.
as we're seeing in places like the allegations at Activision Blizzard, it's not actually happening probably at all. So there's a lot of bad stuff that kind of needs to get dealt with at the moment.
Yeah.
Well,
I have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I would also encourage people in the industry and creators to use our research. You know, it's available to everyone and has some valuable insights in there for everybody. So I think it'd be important for the community to look at that.
I have a question for Geena, actually, if I may. So I'm curious, because you do so much great work in sort of other types of media and film and TV around representation, what are the sort of similarities you're seeing? And what are the sort of differences you're seeing between those spaces and, you know, as you've sort of set your foot in looking at this in the games industry as well?
Right. Well, yeah, our first the reason I started the Institute and the original object was to impact on-screen character representation in what kids see, because I felt that there were some negative messages coming through, especially about females and a profound lack of female characters in what was made for little kids. And why are we teaching children to have unconscious bias from the beginning? And we've had some really very good success in making a difference in the 15 years that we've been doing it. And it's really been through the research. The research has had the most impact for us in that a lot of times people aren't aware fully of what they're making. You know, they see it one way, but where the research shows that it's actually another way. So, so just learning about what they're actually showing helps them realize they need to make a change. And so we can hope that the research will inspire change in the same way, in the gaming industry, where they say, wow, we didn't realize that was the case, and how poor our representation is of people of color and with disabilities and LGBTQIA+. So let's try making some changes. So, I mean, that is a hopeful outcome for this.
Yeah, are some difficulties coming up well, I imagine there are, with showing people data and having them face what these unconscious biases.
Right. It's an incredible a powerful, incredibly powerful unconscious biases, where you literally can't see what it is you're making. It was so eye-opening to people when we had, I suspected that people weren't adding female characters because they didn't realize that they weren't including enough female characters. They thought they were doing right by girls, but pointing it out to them and helping them see what they're actually making made all the difference. And we've actually now, the most exciting goal that we've achieved is that lead characters for lead characters in both children's television and movies made for children, we've now achieved parity between the male and female lead characters. So this is monumental. It's never happened before. And it's a huge change since we started 15 years ago. So dramatic progress can be made. People just have to be aware that it needs to be made.
Yeah, I love that because, to speak to one of the reasons why I started Glow Up Games, my company, is, feeling simultaneously inspired by, but then frustrated by the positive changes that we were seeing in like film and TV, with creators of color taking the helm more and more creators of color starting their own production companies and being able to have those opportunities, but then realizing that same change just isn't happening happening in the games industry. And so wanting to really sort of step up and try and bring that change into effect. So for example, creators like Issa Rae, who, and we're at Glow Up, full disclosure, we're working on a tie-in game for her hit TV show Insecure. But that to us like speaks to that difference, right, between like the changes, as you're saying, Geena, that have happened in film, in TV, etc. But the games industry basically just has a long way to go.
Geena, we really appreciate the work you put into giving us some hard data to show to developers, like that this needs to move, this needs to change. This is the ugly truth on paper. Like these are the actual numbers and percentages. It's undeniable. So
right.
Thank you so much for putting in that work.
Well, yeah, and that's our goal, is to take our study to all the leading game developers and companies, to share it with them privately and see what we can encourage to happen.
Okay. I want to thank you both for coming out, and this was a fantastic talk, and I think an important time for it. Geena, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much as well for coming out. If you have anything in closing to say to the audience, I mean, feel free.
No, just that I love gaming. I every day I play games far too long. People say, "Oh, you're so busy." I'm like, "Really? Is that why I have such a high score on Candy Crush?" So it's
you definitely probably have mine beat.
I love playing games, and it's important to me, and so this is all really fun and important to me. And I have two boys, teenage boys, so it's all very important to me.
Yeah, and I think that's the vital thing. We all love games, and we want them to be better. That's really what we're asking for at the end of the day. What folks, Mitu and Geena, you're trying to do here, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
So again, thank you so much for coming out today and have this talk. Thank you to the GDC audience for watching us, and please enjoy the rest of your show.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you, Geena. Great to have you at your first GDC.
Thank you, Mitu. Thank you. All right, take care.